Привit. Hello.
Um,
How are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
Um, I'm tense because especially for those folks listening us live, really want to encourage you to follow events in Lysychansk, in Severodonetsk, and across all eastern Ukraine, where Russia now, as we speak, methodically erasing Ukrainian cities and villages. And the footage from there is absolutely apocalyptic and also a powerful reminder that genocide in Ukraine has been getting, unfortunately, only worse in recent weeks.
Yeah.
That's why it's another reminder why Ukraine needs more arms and more support. Definitely not what we've already received, which is I think, less than 10% of what we asked for.
Yeah. And also, I know yesterday, I don't know why couldn't sleep for the longest of times until 3 a.m. And I was just seeing that loads of Ukrainians were also up and about. And I saw a post by one of the Kiev Independent reporters, and it just said it was a map of Eastern Ukraine and just a note that said this is not good for us. And I just, yeah, after that it was very hard to go back to trying to go to sleep. But I think, as Maksym says, Eastern Ukraine right now is so crucial for us to keep talking about and flagging, because I've even heard some people also be like, oh, but Kyiv is fine now, right? Like parts of Ukraine are okay now, right? And it's yes, but what people don't realize is that so many of our friends, our family, and everyone who has joined the army of Ukraine has been fully now, basically, not fully, but a lot of them have been moved to Eastern Ukraine, where the big battle is happening right now. That is so crucial for us.
And a big hello and the biggest hug ever to our sponsors from our Patreon page. This show is 100% independent, volunteer, and listener supported, and wouldn't be possible to keep doing these broadcasts and doing these podcasts without your guys' help. So thank you so much. You just check, if you're not our sponsor, check our Patreon page. It has the same name, Ukrainian Spaces Together. And if you become our sponsor, it's not a charity. You get so much cool stuff on our Patreon page and extra bonus content. But most importantly, during our live shows, you have a front seat and you can ask our questions, our featured Ukrainians, at any point before or during. So please do that. We always love to, give you that front seat for your support and solidarity. So I think that's it. Valeria, if you don't mind, I'll start our show maybe today with sharing a bit of personal family story I've never shared before, if you don't mind.
Of course, I would never mind.
Well, I also think it's a good occasion because today, June 22nd, on 1941, Nazis broke the colonial pact with communist Russia and invaded it. And my father's dad served actually with the Red Army in tank troops. And when Red Army started pushing back Nazis several years after that, back to the West, he participated in one of the largest tank battles in Western Ukraine. And, even back then, Russians loved to send Ukrainians ahead and use them as battle meat, hiding behind their backs. So, of course, he was on the front line, on the very, very front line. And that's why there are so many Ukrainians died in the World War II, much more than Russians, actually much more than any other nation in Europe lost to this war. So my grandpa's tank gets hit. The rest of the unit thinks he's dead. They leave him behind. And out of nowhere, Ukrainian resistance fighter appear, several actually. And at the time, they would fight both Russian and German occupations. So they take him in, they help him to recover and nurture back him to life in a resistance camp. And then they just let him go to rejoin his Red Army unit, the same army that was mass murdering Ukrainian resistance fighters. And here's the most interesting thing about it. My granddad spoke Ukrainian, but he not necessarily looked like one. He was a Romani Ukrainian, which, had much darker skin than an average Ukrainian back then. And he faced a lot of racist shit because of it, and he never liked to talk about his roots. But I think this whole story of his rescue makes me think now that even back then, decades ago, Ukrainian folks already understood the diversity of the Ukrainian identity and looked at it more like a political nation kind of thing, the way we look at it now. Yeah, so I'm open about my mixed background, Georgian, mixed Asian, fraction of a Roma, coming to my Ukrainian identity through definitely a conscious choice. It was a journey. And only recently, all these overlapping identity puzzles clicked into full harmony and, what I feel and think to be Ukrainian means. So that's why it was so important to make sure this conversation today happens, to honor my late grandpa, who have never had the chance to manifest his Roma identity, and to honor the diversity of Ukraine that fights for the survival. And I think this is the perfect moment to introduce our featured Ukrainian today. Natali, are you with us? Please unmute.
Yes, hello.
Hey.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you so much for joining us. And first and foremost, wanted to let you to introduce yourself. It's our golden rule. So what's your name, where you come from, and what your life has been like in recent 4 months. Yep, it's been 4 months. So go ahead, please.
Thank you, Maksym. And first of all, thank you so much for invitation and be a part of Ukrainian Spaces. It's such an honor for me. And first of all, also I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Natali Tomenko. I'm coming from a central part of Ukraine. Can you hear me well? Because I'm
go ahead. It's everything's
okay.
fine. Yeah.
I flee Ukraine with a part of my family on the 10th day of the war. Well, when the war started on 24th of February, I've been at my hometown, central part of Ukraine, Poltava region, and everything seems to be okay until that time. But then in one night, the life totally changed. And we were living under horrible conditions during all the 10 days. And every day we were thinking what to do because we were hearing everything what was going around. The military equipment, and we were hiding in basement, and etc., etc. And it was really scary because we also have in our family kids. It's my niece, and she's 2 years old, and my sister, she's 12. And we were most of all scared because of them. And then we were thinking around 3 days where to go, how to make our roads safer. And then we decided that we are going on the western part of Ukraine and then crossing the border and moving to Hungary. That's what we did. And we were traveling around 40 hours from central part of Ukraine to Uzhgorod. The way was really terrible and the most difficult in my life. But we did it, and my father was really in a bad health condition, and this road took a few years of his life for sure. I never saw that many cars on the road, military equipment, and people in panic. But we managed. We crossed the border at night by feet, with kids on our hands. Volunteers were helping us with our bags, and on the other side of the border, my friend from Hungary with her husband were waiting for us, and they took us to their home. Then we spent a while in their house, around 4 or 5 days, and then we moved to a dormitory of Central European University in where I was studying previously. So they hosted us and provided accommodation. And in Budapest, we spent around 3 or 4 weeks. And It was difficult times because kids were trying to adapt to new circumstances and environment. And my sister-in-law, she never was abroad, so for her everything was new and super traumatic, I would say.
Mm.
And kids also got sick from time to time, and yeah, it was such incredible experience, and I would never experience it again. And then after 4 weeks, we decided to move to Austria because the time came to register, and we found out that the circumstances and what Hungary is providing for Ukrainians, it's not the best for us. And also we know that in Hungary there is a big discrimination against Roma people, and we
Yeah.
decided that Austria is a better choice. That's why we went there, and so far we are staying here in Vienna with my family.
Well, there are, approximately 400,000 Roma Ukrainians that used to live in Ukraine before genocide started. And of course, many others used to live in Ukraine before genocide started. And of course, like many other Ukrainians, they were displaced and had to find a new home, and they were traveling as you and your family to the West. And this is something that unfortunately where a lot of we see double standards of treating refugees with from Ukraine, that Ukrainians that have darker skin would be treated differently. And I saw it myself in so many ways in refugee camps and centers in Warsaw and in Prague, where, for example, Roma Ukrainians or Ukrainians with darker skin would be treated completely differently when it comes to offering them help and stuff like that. So, can you talk just a bit about the challenges that Roma Ukrainians and Ukrainians with darker skin face when they try to find and seek refuge in European Union at the moment?
Yeah, sure. Well, I can start with my personal experience. A lot of people asking me whether I faced with discrimination on the border, and I'm always answering that unfortunately not, due to the fact that I'm being privileged if we are talking in terms of color of skin. So I'm being light skin, and all of my family members, and it somehow made us invisible on the border, and no one could recognize that we are Roma. That's why we didn't face with any difficulties, even though because of the kids, everyone was really nice to us. But I know that a lot of my relatives and friends who has visible features of Roma identity as skin, and they talk Romani language, and they cross the border in groups of relatives. So it's really visible, and those people were denied to get the same facilities as others. So there are examples in Moldova when Roma people were put in the most horrific shelters, and it was made some kind of segregation in there. So all Roma were put in accommodation with lack of food and water, and there was one photographer who made some project there, and due to this publicity, the shelter was closed, and the Roma were transported to other spaces. But we don't know how it went, whether those new accommodations were better or not. And also there is a big anti-Gypsyism. Anti-Gypsyism is a special form of discrimination against Roma people. So this anti-Gypsyism is very present right now in Czech Republic, unfortunately. A lot of friends whom I know personally went there. They were treated with some kind of unwillingness to help, and in general, even before the war, we know that in Czech Republic it was very spread there. The anti-Gypsyism, and I have some friends from Czech Republic who were telling me about some far-right group that are present there. So nowadays for Roma it's complicated everywhere, but in these countries I would say for now the most, as human rights monitoring shows.
Yeah, unfortunately, it always breaks my heart because when I see Roma Ukrainians in, especially in Czechia, and how drastically different the treatment by local authorities they face, it's just shocking for me, but not unfortunately surprising. And not that the situation back in Ukraine has been also ideal. Roma Ukrainians still remain one of the most discriminated groups and minorities in the country. But I was wondering to ask you, I mean, during these 4 months, you emerged as this brilliant, young, passionate voice, young voice for Roma Ukrainians on international stage, constantly, continuously talking about and amplifying stories of Roma Ukrainians everywhere, talking not only about the problems, but also the stories of defiance and perseverance and the stories of Roma Ukrainians fight back against Russian fascist invasion. So I was wondering to, ask you how this even, happened in your life that you decided that this is the time for you to step up and become that voice. And as I understand, it's also, related to your work with ARCA, which is my favorite organization of young Roma Ukrainians. So can you enlighten us a bit more about that, please, as well?
Yeah, sure, Maxim. So I started my activist work around 5 years ago, and with my friends, we started to organize different initiatives in where Roma topics were raised, where we worked with youngsters, and we started to work in non-formal education, making training, seminars, abroad trips for youngsters in order to make this exchange, to educate them, to inspire them, to empower to do something in this life, and to open the possibilities which are somehow hidden for them. And then we registered our organization in 2018. It's an agency of advocacy Roma culture in Ukraine. And we started to work with youngsters across whole Ukraine and also abroad. And so the main goal of the organization is to make a positive presence of Ukrainian Roma community in a wide information space by empowering its youth leaders, artists, and media activists. And we are not proposing an exclusive Roma space, but rather advocate for the idea that we are Ukrainian Roma first and foremost, an integral part of the country's history and society. And when the war happened, we had to restructure everything. I mean, all the projects that were confirmed were or cancelled at all, or the funding that we got were directed to humanitarian aid. So all money what we had, we directed to humanitarian aid, and we started to provide financial support for Roma and non-Roma families who found themselves in a difficult situation due to hostilities in different parts of Ukraine. People could buy for this money food, medicine, and other basic hygiene items. Also, we were helping with evacuation process of civilians, and majority it was women and kids, and also some elderly who survived Roma genocide. And besides of that, we also were sending and still sending some money and stuff to the front lines, to our army, to our Roma representatives and soldiers, and also non-Roma who are in need and who just contacted us via some networks and asked for help. For example, we were collecting money to buy a car for Htyrka region, in where people could deactivate the bombs in the region, because unfortunately they didn't have even equipment to do so. So people were doing it with just walking on feet with hands, and we hope that this car really saved someone's lives. And besides of them, a lot of medicine was sent there, and warm clothes and batteries and other stuff.
But I wanted to, because I watched one of your recent, public appearances, and you said one of the most, powerful things for me, that you mentioned that these days, especially young Roma Ukrainians are, in charge of helping community, but also because they have a bit more resources and they need to take care of the families, which is basically the same for many young Ukrainians these days. We support our extended families, especially those who are still on the front line. But then you said also that it kind of empowers you also to speak out more about what it means to be Roma Ukrainian these days, and what you fight for, because a lot of Roma Ukrainians are also on the front line, proudly serving openly, not shying away from their identity. So for you these days, why do you think it's important that the voices of Roma Ukrainians are amplified during this genocide, even more so than usually?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's really essential to talk about it, why it's important right now for Roma representatives to stand up and talk, to not be silent, to not be afraid. And as a historian somehow, because I have cultural heritage background, I can give you some example from a past when during the Second World War, Roma were participating in the war, same like they are doing right now. They are like my grandfather also was there on the front lines. And there were a lot of Roma who were participated, but somehow it was hidden. So this information was not accessible for the majority, for the society. And all life till now, we're trying to prove that our ancestors were participating in the war, that they were not excluded, they were part of the whole victory that happened. And right now, I think, and all my team is ensured that we have to show, not in the 50 years, but right now, that we are actually the part of society. We were, we are, and we will be. And we stay shoulder by shoulder with Ukrainians because we live on this territory. We regard this territory as ours. And it's our neighbors. We are neighbors of their houses. So it's our land and we protect it. Doesn't matter what happened. It's like in family, always happen some arguments between family members. Same, we know the situation that Roma were living in Ukraine for centuries, and the situation never was easy. Like they were repressed, but when something happens, like someone from outside would approach the family and touch some of the members, no one is allowed to do it. So that's why now we are actually uniting. And later on, we will see how Roma will live in Ukraine. But right now, we are helping because it's our land as well. And yeah. Not everything is very simple as it seems to be. And we, people from Ukraine, we know that when you declare your identity, there can be some consequences for sure. But yeah, just the risk which person is taking on their own, and they are responsible for this. But there are a lot of us, and if all of us will not be afraid and we unite and we show ourselves, that's the power. And I think that's good that there are some people like you, like others, that can show that we are here, and we are waiting for people like us unite us, not to stay aside.
One of my favorite quotes, I think it's on Arca's Instagram, which you definitely need to check because the organization is not so active on Twitter, but has a fantastic Instagram with a lot of English language content as well. And in one of your speeches, you say this powerful phrase. I loved it instantly. Roma Ukrainians too. People should be united now because the time has come for us to help each other. And there's like more to that speech, but I just wanted to thank you because this is the first time when I probably heard something as powerful coming from Roma Ukrainian marrying and emphasizing that Roma are Ukrainians the same way as any other Ukrainians of other identities are, and they must be heard and their stories must be amplified. And I mean, regarding this, I really also loved, and this is something close to you as well. You always mention Roma Ukrainian women in your talks and in your lectures and in your speeches. And I wanted to ask you, why do you think this is something that you're extra passionate about, and what the rest of the world and also Ukrainians get wrong about Romani women these days, and especially during the genocide?
Yeah, Maxim, thank you for the words you said about my speech previously, and just to mention that speech really took a lot of my energy and preparations, because I was really talking on the floor with the big diplomats, and my family members at those times were not okay with health, and I was really in traumatic experience going through all the stuff, and I was like really mad when someone stopped me, and I was screaming, and people somehow thought like it's just so emotional because she's Roma or she's woman and she's on her period or whatever, and I
Oh,
just wanted to kick you. I don't know, just scream. Yeah, and but anyway, the impact of that speech was worse. I've been participating in many of these trainings, like conferences and public speeches, and I was surprised that in general society is not prepared to talk with victims. So, like, I can see that even in the circles of people who were working with the topics of Second World War and Roma genocide, Jewish Holocaust, those people, like from history, they saw how the victims were treated, and somehow they could assume how to speak with them. But in reality, what we see that nowadays is actually happening. Same shit. I'm sorry for this rude words, but society doesn't know how to communicate with people in actually fresh trauma. So people didn't overcome it yet, and when people come to me and say you are so emotional, and it's some kind of emotional abuse, like no one is allowed to tell this. And right now in the organization we establishing the ethics on how to talk with victims, and for instance with vulnerable groups as Roma and women. And continuing with topic of women, why I'm so passionate about women's rights in general, because I know how it's to grow up in a conservative circle. My family, for instance, is also kind of conservative Roma who were making boundaries in my childhood, and now I understand why it was happening. So previously I was just feeling why I don't have access to all that stuff, and why my friends can go out whenever they want and I cannot, why I'm so protected. And just now I understand that the Roma through the history were repressed, and from the outside, from the majority, and somehow families became really close in order to save their beloved ones, not to allow someone to harm, someone to perform anti-Gypsyism, I don't know, hate crimes or whatever. Just now I understand it, but in my childhood I didn't. And since the childhood I was very resistant about my rights, about rights of my cousins, like especially women, that we are part of the family, society, that we can do a lot in this life. And it just helped me and to resist, and actually changed my life. So I achieved something. I graduated from one, second university, third, and I became internationally visible. I've got a lot of international Roma friends, And when I came to the Central European University with a circle of Roma representatives from different parts of the world, I understood how it's essential to have this resistance and be in a circle of peers with the same aims in life. Yeah, and I started to be friends with a lot of Roma women there, and some of them were studying on gender studies, and we were having like really very interesting topics on how women rights should be today's raised, and how especially Roma women rights should be expressed, because it's a bit different, and being a vulnerable group and following traditions, and also the whole concept of Roma identity is a big question. What does it mean to be a Roma? And for everyone, it's very difficult to answer, and it's very different from because you know that in Ukraine there are 15 Roma groups, and each group is different by dialect, by location where they live, traditions, religion, and values, circles, style of life. So everything is super different, and for everyone to be a Roma is something their own. I regard my identity of being a Roma, being Ukrainian, being a woman, being an artist and historian, and there are really a lot of implications, and it's changing through life. And what I can see right now, that the women in Ukraine nowadays, Roma women, they are actually the power. And I started to be interested in psychology since few years, and what I can see that nowadays men in general, but Roma men of course, because they are not excluded from this concept, they are in a big trauma, unfortunately, because all what's happening in all the world, and well, talking about equality, even though we are talking about equality, but Roma men have to go to the front lines, and women actually have choice, but they don't have that much choice, and this makes them really vulnerable, oppressed, and they understand that they cannot support their families as they used to do it previously, and some of them lost really their jobs, and women are taking a lot of stuff on their shoulders right now. They have to feed families, they have to take care of kids as they did before, but now even more to protect mentally and physically as well. And also, women are taking kids and going abroad, fleeing the countries. And talking about the Roma, that it's such a big loss when family are separating, because even coming back to Second World War, when in Auschwitz and concentration camps, we know that the barracks were divided into male barracks, females, and kids. But in Roma case, barracks with Roma people, they were all on the same territory. So even for Nazis, it was dangerous to separate families. So I just want to make this parallel and show how it's essential for families, Roma families, to be together. And now that they have to be separated, it's a big loss.
But also, I think like maybe exactly this hardship and basically surviving through the same horror and challenges, and especially for those families, Ukrainian families that get separated, this experience that we're living together through, it also kind of opens up a lot of people's eyes who had prejudices against some of the minorities before, because in this kind of life or death situation, you clearly understand that things like that do not matter at all. And, you know, the only thing that can unite us is basic acts of humanity. And I love the stories that you guys post in English as well on Arca, the Younger Arca website. And one of the stories that I actually remember still stays with me is about the Roma family from Mariupol, and how they survived through blockade, Russian fascist blockade, amid horrible situation, amid like lack of food, or just, you know, tens of thousands of people died there. But the story is so powerful because it shows how, Roma men were risking their lives trying to get food for everyone in their, in the basement or the house they were living in. Ukrainians, non-Ukrainians, Roma, non-Roma. And I was wondering too, I mean, everyone else, you got to check that story. I also pinned it to this conversation. But wanted to ask you if there is any particular story about Roma Ukrainians that also kind of stayed with you in recent weeks. I know there are so many, but maybe something that always kind of inspires you or helps you to continue and move on.
Yeah, just when you were telling this, I recalled a case that actually pushed us to start working in humanitarian aid sphere. So when the war began in February, I still was at home in my hometown, in the house of my parents, and I've got a call from my friend from Kherson, and she told me that right now in their house around 30 people hiding their house on a basement. There are Roma, Ukrainians, and people of other nationalities, everyone who will live in close to them, so their neighbors. Like they were hiding there because they had a really good basement which was protected and somehow it was safe there. And they were calling me and asking for some kind of financial help because around a week all people there were sitting without going to shops, without even coming up from the basement, and they ate already everything what was in their house. They couldn't go to shop, but even when they managed one time, she told me to escape and buy some pieces of bread and butter in a shop close by the house because everything already was sold and those days of blockade. And she asked me that they really need some money because they run out of money and food and they need to feed these people who are in their house. And she never mentioned like that there are people of other nationalities. I mean, she didn't make it a problem out of this. Like she said, like we're all humans and we have to feed these humans. And actually, that was the first case when we sent out money and we understood that actually they are not the only ones, that there are families like this everywhere who right now helping. And yeah, I know. And when I was hearing her voice, my heart was breaking. I mean, I know that this family used to be very intelligent and very wealthy, but nowadays money doesn't matter. I mean, it's just and we are talking about families who had something before the war. What
Yeah.
if we are talking about those families who were in bad economical positions even before the war? Now they are really crashed. And also talking about Mariupol, because I had to evacuate my family from Mariupol. There is my cousin and nephew and some relatives over there. So we couldn't manage to evacuate them for days, for weeks. We didn't have connections with them for weeks. And then when they finally called and said, we are moving out finally, and they managed to come to the Polish border. And yeah, I was talking with my cousin, and she was telling me, I saw so much on the road, bodies of dead people, Russian army just shooting in the windows of the cars, and all this horror. And when they arrived to Czech Republic and her child, my nephew, he was really very traumatized, and he's still having sessions with psychologists. And she is also crashed. I don't know how much time she would need to recover from this. and most probably she will never forget it. I mean, it's a trauma of generations. It's not just, and also it's interesting because recently we had a talk with war psychologists from Ukraine for our ARCA team, because in July we will have some trainings for youngsters, and in order to work with people in trauma, we had to educate first of all ourselves how to work with youngsters. Who flee from the war, who experienced all this. And we had this interesting talk with psychologists who told us that this trauma that people got during the war will not disappear easily, of course, as we could see it on example of the Second World War. And I asked him, so how many years we need to come back, not to normal life, but at least to move on? And he said that I will never forget the war. My kids will never forget the war, but I hope that my grandchildren will live differently. So it doesn't mean that they will forget, but it means that they can live maybe freely from this psychological pressure.
I think that's why there's so much pressure on us and our generation that we make sure that this is last time that they do it to our people. Because, again, remembering my Roma granddad and his participation in the war, and of course, the rest of the family that also lived under occupation, both occupations. Of course, they were traumatized to the point that they were not comfortable ever to talk about. For example, my granddad was so traumatized that definitely he was struggling until the end of his lives, end of his days. But I feel like this is heartbreaking that they were thinking the same, I think, and they were talking the same, that they survived. So we have normal lives, and so they have families and can have children, and then we just, also being born in a safer, normal world. And now basically our country is experiencing the same that they experience. And I think sometimes this is where our mission as a generation of young Ukrainians to make sure that it stops here, it stops with us. So when they say that hopefully your kids won't be experiencing anything like that, it becomes true, not like this never-ending colonial cycle that we're lived through.
Yeah, talking about comparison, I know that it doesn't have sense to compare, and we are not comparing the experiences of the Second World War and what's happening nowadays. But right now, what we are doing in Ukraine is that we are supporting Roma genocide survivors. So we've got some funding from abroad in order to support the families, and now we are sending out and supporting families, and also we are having conversations with them. So we will have a project with testimonies in where people will talk about their experiences. And we didn't ask, but people, some kind of unconsciously, they are reflecting and comparing the both experience they went through. So there are some of Roma survivors who were hiding in basements during the Second World War, and right now they are hiding in the same basements. And how they are reflecting right now that they are comparing Hitler and Putin and talking about all this stuff. And it's just ridiculous and very sad to see that these survivors, they have to go through the same stuff. It's like it was not enough during those times. Now they again have to face with this. Yeah, just very unfair. All these elderly, when I see them and when I talk to them, it's like I wish to give them like few more years just to live, to enjoy their life and end up it on a positive note.
I have a last remaining surviving grandma, and she's 92. and she's in Ukraine, not far from frontline, and she cannot, and she doesn't want even to go. But this is something that we often, every call, we end on a note that she says, like, don't worry, I'll keep healthy, I'll take care of myself because I survived Stalin and Hitler, and I want to survive Putin as well. So this is her kind of plan, to be defiant and to live the day when she sees Putin dead and this genocide over. So they're just absolutely amazing.
But
Yeah,
we're still happy that these people still alive and they are around us and they can inspire the youngsters, you
yeah,
know. They are the real example that we will survive it, it will end at some time, and we will enjoy our lives and everything will be more or less okay, yeah, how it can be. And yeah, all this dialogue between the old generations and youngsters, we regard it's essential, and we're
yeah.
trying to, and we hope that these people still will remain alive, and after the war we will be able to invite them to our big events, because we have some kind of commemorational events where we remembering and having commemorational ceremonies around the 2nd of August about the day of remembrance of the victims of the Babin Yar in Kiev. And actually this year we will have the commemorational ceremony in Berlin,
Hmm.
because we cannot do it in Kiev, obviously. That's why we will gather the youngsters who flee from the war and those who can leave the Ukraine right now in Berlin, and make a big event there and recall all the victims, Ukrainians, Roma, and those who
Yeah.
had to give their lives during those times, and nowadays as well.
What a history has such a sense of twisted irony that we cannot do that back in Ukraine because of fascism and a war, but we can do it in Berlin, that used to also orchestrate the same genocide, but so decades ago. Unfortunately, I mean, I love this conversation. Love having you on Ukrainian Spaces so much, but we'll have to wrap up soon. So I wanted to end with a quick, our favorite quick question: what it means to be a Ukrainian for you these days, and has it in any way changed in the last 4 months?
Yes, I think the war affects everyone. And even though I never been a nationalist in my future, in my past, but nowadays, whether you want or you don't want, you becoming the one. And I'm just, for me, to be in Ukrainian Roma means to be proud of my family, of my community, of my country, to defend it, to protect it, to help. Uh, uh, in any case, in every way I can. If I need to speak, I will speak. If I need to help people directly, I will help. And whenever it's needed from me, I will do it to protect my family foremost, and yeah, and my friends and
Thank
country
you.
in general.
Before we leave, can you also maybe tell everyone else how they can support your work and support the work of ARCA, where to look, what they can do, especially for Roma Ukrainians back in Ukraine and those who are now relocated or in refuge?
Yes, yes. Everyone can find information about our work, what we are doing on our official pages as website, uh, UNGO Arca, and also Instagram and Facebook. And there is actually one platform that we recently started. It's JANES. It's informational platform, contemporary media that spreads knowledge. And exists for dialogue building in Ukraine and abroad. And there you can see already a lot of articles published in where our journalists and also youngsters like civil journalists are making interviews with Roma representatives who still live in Ukraine or who went abroad about their work, about their experiences. And please follow us. There will be a lot of stuff published later on. And thank you so much for this opportunity being with you. and to make the voice of Roma in Ukraine being heard. Thank you, Maxim.
Well, yeah, thank you. And as we tell everyone, you're part of Ukrainian Spaces family now. So at any point, if you want to come back, talk about the issues you want to talk, and this is the space for you to claim at any point. So hopefully, and I'm pretty sure we'll hear you here coming back and in sometime future as well. We would be delighted to have you back. That's for sure.
For sure, with pleasure.
Thank you. Okay, guys, we have to wrap up. This is the message also for all fellow Ukrainians who are listening to us. You please claim Ukrainian Spaces hashtag on all social media platforms, on Twitter or Instagram. You can suggest our topics and Ukrainians you'd like us to feature, but also you share your experiences and your stories, and we always love to quote them during the show and amplify. This is the hashtag for you to claim and the space for you to claim. But also check our podcasts because these sessions are being automatically recorded and they're uploaded as podcasts now on Spotify, Apple, Castbox, Google Podcast, Anchor. So we're expanding in platforms as well. And thank you so much once again for our sponsors from our Patreon page. We have a very engaged, cool, and growing community of our sponsors. And they make sure that Ukrainian voices are getting amplified and Ukrainian conversations get decolonized on social media. So thank you so much. This is not a charity. If you consider to become our sponsor, you'll get a lot of cool bonus extra stuff from our Patreon page, but also front seat when you want to ask questions to our guests, featured Ukrainians, during live broadcast or beforehand. So thank you so much for your support as well. I think this is it. Apart from one thing, as always, it's Slava Ukraini.